we've got all of these kind of like shops and places, you know, some of these like, hipster style barbershops. And it was like, oh, things are changing. Like a historical Brixton market where everybody gets their food things from. It's been there since the friggin' 70s or 60s, maybe even longer. And it's like, you were gonna get rid of that for flats. And your terrible DJing. Always come back to the fact that gentrification, whilst on the surface level, is about, you know, these Costas and pet shops and Pilates coming. But actually, it's land justice. It's like about who owns the land and what they get to do with it. And oftentimes it is landlords and developers who own that land and they kick people out.
Welcome to the Knowledge Chronicles series. My name is Sara Bafo and I'm the host. And in this series, I meet people to talk about Pan-Africanism, how feminism is going to liberate us, the impact of gentrification, and we really root knowledge back into community for and by us. In this episode, I sit down with Simmone Ahiaku, who's a community organiser and writer. We really talk about the impact of gentrification, but specifically in Brixton where she grew up. And also we talk about the violence of gentrification and who truly profits from it. Thank you, Simmone, for joining us and joining the Knowledge Chronicles. I really appreciate it. We're in an area, Brixton, which has been really influential in your organising and who you are. Before we start, I would love for you to have spaciousness to talk about who you are, the work that you do, the organising you're involved in, and anything you'd like to share.
Oh my gosh, yes. I feel like every time I ask this question, I'm like, who am I? What do I even do with myself? But I'm Simmone. My pronouns are she, her. I'm an organiser, a campaigner, a podcaster, a writer, and a facilitator. And I started in like climate organising. It's always gonna have my heart and back there now. But throughout the years, I've done different things from like anti-racism organising to abolitionist organising around like prison abolition, like feminist organising and like educational justice organising, and then up until most recently, housing justice organising, which has played a really big part in my life even before I entered the movement, but also just being in it with the London Renters Union. Shout out them, love you guys. It has like shown me so much about like the system itself and like why we're here, like how gentrification affects places like Brixton, you know.
Market. We are coming along to one of the busiest shopping centres in London. Everybody comes to get their weekend groceries. This is Brixton Station Road, Southwest 9.
Peckham, Hackney, even Manchester, Birmingham, all of the places. So that was like such a big insight into like feelings that I've always had quite personal in my life and my friends' lives. Outside of that, I love geography. I'm a sister. I'm an auntie. I'm a daughter. You know, I have a mummy. Somebody is looking out for me. I'm a big party girl. I love to have fun. I love to be out on the party. I love the club. People like to stay inside. I think that's a recession indicator. Get outside. We are young and we have knees. We should use them. What else? Who else? At the moment, I currently work at Greenpeace as a campaigner on the Stop Drilling, Start Paying campaign, which I always butcher. And it's essentially working on Shell or like big oil, but our target is Shell and the kind of extraction and disruption that they have caused to countries in the global south, for example, like Nigeria, but also Southeast Asia, loads of countries in Southeast Asia, and thinking about who is accountable for that. And it should be all companies, but in reality, it's often individuals like us that face the brunt, and like the governments are complicit and so are these oil companies. So it's been really great to work on the campaign like that, and actually like that's where my passions lie, around like colonialism and like capitalism and extraction and like climate change and climate justice. So that's been like really sick. At the moment, I haven't been organising loads, just a little bit of like housing organising in Brixton, because there's always something going on to do with gentrification, which we'll get into later. But But I have recently joined this all called Food Cycle, and that has been really wholesome.
Yeah.
I actually used to do it in uni, so like 10 years ago, and now I'm like, oh my God, why did I stop doing this?
Yeah.
And it's basically like a food, so like loads of supermarkets throw out food, and then like rather than like chuck it into a huge dumpster, Food Cycle like take it away and they prepare meals in like different parts of town, and then you can do the cooking side or the hosting side, and it's like a free cafe for everyone to come. And I love cooking, so I've been on the cooking side, and that has been so wholesome.
That is
And like, you know, people come, it like combats loneliness and hunger. I'm like, I'm with it.
Yeah, it's a lot. You spoke a lot about like collectivity and community and organizing. What moment like politicized you? Like just like politicized you, radicalized you, got you to a point where you're like so passionate about like doing, which you spoke a lot about now.
Oh my God, great question. I feel like there are so many moments of my life that have like politicized me, but I'll name two. I think my first one wasn't like outwardly political, so I like to start with that one. For some people, I say some people, I think everyone lives a politicized life, and like it's really important for people to recognize their experiences as political.
Yeah.
And so like the first one, I used to live in Stockwell Gardens Estate. My one claim to fame is I've lived in the same postcode all of my life. Which is
S9.
That is that's beautiful.
Iconic. In the world of like transient living in London, that's iconic. So Stockwell Gardens Estate, and basically like everyone knew each other. It was one of those places where like you knew your neighbors looked after you. It was genuinely a place where if you didn't have sugar, you could ask your neighbor and you would get some sugar. And it used to overlook the football pitch. So it was like different moms and different parents would like essentially watch over all of the children. It was beautiful. And like there used to be like a Clamp neighborhood watch, and my dad was part of the Clamp neighborhood watch. So basically like if anybody got a clamp in town, clamps are so expensive to like remove. They're like £400. So like my dad and 5 other dads in the estate put money together to buy a chainsaw. And so they would, anytime somebody had a clamp, they would knock on my dad's door. My dad's called Michael, and they'd be like, is Michael in? And I'd be like,
Yep.
yeah. And I'd be like, I need help with my clamp. And him and the boys would go downstairs and saw that thing off.
Yeah.
Which it's obviously not legal, but that is just the essence
The
of
community.
Exactly. It's like the essence of like what it means to like have community and look after each other. And you know, actually like there's no need for you to pay this £400. Like you already, it would be better use if that £400 went somewhere else. So we're just gonna sort off for you. And I think that's one of the things that politicized me. One, because I used to think it was so kind and so like, wow, that's so sweet of you to just saw this thing off. And it didn't matter who it was. Like even if my dad and the people, I'd never met them, but they lived in the estate, then he would be like, I'm going to saw this thing off for you, that's no problem. But I also think it was liberating in the sense that like, actually a lot of the things that we want and like a lot of the justice that we want comes from ourselves. And it's like, you can entrust I don't even know what company removes the clamps. Is it DVLA? Who even knows? You can trust this company to take off your clamp for £400, or you can just do it yourself. And it's like, actually, I think it's such a nice metaphor for so many things in life where we like outsource our agency to a lot of things, like whether it's the police or somebody else, or I don't even know, like the government and the state, like, when in reality, like a lot of what we enjoy of today has come from the organizing and off the backs of everyday people just like you, whether it's workers, I don't know, people in schools, people in hospitals, like just everyday people like you have fought for the rights that we have today. So that's like my like number one thing. And I lived there when I was like, I don't know, 0 to around 7. So I was really young when people used to knock on my door and ask for this kind of removal service. That was like really beautiful to see, like really young. And then the other one is actually like the estate that I live in now, that I have lived in since leaving that estate. And basically my old youth club, Matchridge Youth Club, love them down.
We love youth clubs.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow. RIP to all of the youth clubs that have been lost in this nonsense government, many a nonsense government. But basically my area was known for like a lot of like gang violence in the past. It was like an area that like Brixton in general, but specifically my area was painted as like a no-go zone, and like just the police were always, I remember as a young person or a young child, the police were always in my estate. Like it's calmed down loads now, but I wouldn't go a day without the police patrolling the estate, like stop and searches, raids. Like it was nuts. Like, it genuinely felt like we're on lockdown all the time. Like, you couldn't leave the house without seeing a police person. And they used to like stop and search like loads of us, like little kids, boys and girls, people, like it didn't matter. They were like, they just assumed you were part of the gang in the estate. And so they used to stop and search us at the youth center. Like they would line up against, so my youth center, the entrance was sort of like a corridor, and they'd like line up on both ends of that corridor and like stop and search us and be like, who do you know? Essentially trying to like get information out of these young children. We were like between 7 and 13. And it's like, what kind of experiences are you giving these young black kids that are just
surveillance and criminalization?
Literally. And it's like, for a long time, all of us obviously felt really uncomfortable because it's like, who is this grown person patting us down in the friggin' street?
From way back when black people were living their happy lives, doing what they want to do, before slavery began, some people had a grudge on them. Then when slavery started, it was just one big racial attack that kept on going. Some people show their expressions in drawing, some in writing, some in dance. But me, I like to show it in song, so I sing it like this. At first I would like to thank Almighty God for protecting me and seeing me through, for giving me the inspiration that He did, for helping me to do the best in all I do.
And then like we thankfully had a really sick youth worker. Her name was Sherelle. Shout out Sherelle. I don't know where she is nowadays, but I actually wish I'd kept up with her. But she used to always shout at the police and be like, what are you doing to the kids? Like, there's no need to do all of this stuff. And then afterwards, she'd always tell us, you know, like, they shouldn't have to do that to you. And she'd explain like racism and police violence to us. And she'd do a lot of political education, which was like, now that I think about it, really incredible, because she actually didn't have to do that. But I think that like, she just felt so deeply about what the police were doing, and obviously had experiences with the police in her own life. So it was like, I can't normalize this for these young people. And then she was like, after like, they did it for years, to be honest. And then like, I remember when I was like 12, 13, she was like, we're gonna fight back. This was like after like 3 years of the police constantly being there. And she was like, we're gonna do a protest. And I was like, I don't know about all of that, girl.
Was that the first time you heard about protesting, or was that the first time you engaged in a protest?
First time I'd engaged with it.
How old did you?
12, 13. So it was actually just before I started secondary school. I said, oh, I did not know anything about a protest, Ernie. And she was like, we're gonna do a protest. We're gonna fight back. They can't like continue to do this to us. And I was like, yeah, I'm on board, but like, what do you mean? Because even though like I hate the police, like they had been kicking down my neighbor's doors. They'd even kicked down my door several times. So it was just like, I know I don't like them, but even still, I saw them as this unfathomable or unbeatable force that like, that's just what the police do, and you have to roll back and accept it. And it doesn't matter if it's violent, it doesn't matter if it traumatizes you and everybody else. It's just like, that's just what happens. And she was like, no, we can fight back. And I was like, oh. So she literally made us like make placards. She got us to write speeches about how we've been affected by the stop and searches. And she was like, we're gonna march to Brixton police station and we're going to shout. And I was like, oh my God. I was both so excited, but also like, this lady, I don't know, I don't know what she's trying to do to us. But when I was frightened. I said, hello, I haven't even started school yet and I'm gonna have a criminal record. Like genuinely, I thought this is what they're gonna do to me. But I was like, I'm ready, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna fight back. So we actually did it. Like some of the young people spoke about like their experiences with the police, and we stood there for like about an hour or an hour and a half, and we were shouting, no more stop and searches. We had our placards, like we were shouting. The police even came out, one of the like, I don't know, managers, I don't know what the levels of the police are, but one of the lieutenants, who knows, came out and was like, spoke to us. And then after that, like they actually didn't come for a really long time. Like
it's the power of the people.
I know, and literally after that, we were like, whoa. But even in the moment of like chanting with everyone else, I felt so empowered. Like despite like initially being really scared, I was like, oh my God, everybody feels the same way. And everybody feels like this is not right and we can actually stand up for ourselves. And I feel like that was the first time I had stood up for myself and others against the law.
Why is it the police had to keep a vigilant all Friday night and Saturday?
And in Brixton, there have been clashes with a crowd of about 300 youths who have been smashing shop windows.
Many people have been asking the question, what caused the trouble in Brixton Railroad?
Or against, the law part of the state. And that was so empowering. And I was just like, wow, we actually can fight back. And the fact that they didn't come back, I was like,
it's possible.
wow, we really can win on our own accord, our own collective accord. And I feel like that was like the spark in me to be like, yes, this is actually something I want to continue to do. And I want to make sure that other people feel as empowered as I did to get into campaigns and get into organizing. Because actually, like, so many of us feel the same way. Like, so many of us felt this individually, like, this is traumatizing, we hate this so much. And it was only when we like actually came together and spoke about it and we were like, we all feel the same way, why don't we all do something about this? All did something about it. And the police were like, well, we have to listen to these 30 screaming children outside of Brixton police station causing a whole ruckus. Like, people, even the parents will join in. They were like, yeah, this is my child. Or like, yeah, you shouldn't be stopping and searching kids. And it was like a whole thing. And they just had to concede to our demands. And it was like, yeah, that I think is like, that was a politicizing moment for me where I was like,
it's a big moment to be at the age of 12 years old and to stand outside Brixton police station and say, like, it's an act of refusal to be like this big police force that has historically intimidated our people.
Police station, the Brixton police station. Many might have heard of this place.
You're not the answer and you're not the solution. And to have a youth worker to be able to do the political education sounds beautiful. And also your testimony resembles the place that we are in, Brixton. We saw the Brixton uprising, we saw many community centres like be established in Brixton. So to hear your testimony just reminds me of the historical elements of the area. You spoke about your youth worker being really influential, like raising your political consciousness, taking you to your first protest. Is there an organiser or movement that has inspired your past, a person who has also like really radicalized you in a way that you think about?
Oh my God, yes. So many, but one that like really jumps out is FOA, which is the Federation Ogoni Women's Association. And like a lot of people know the Ogoni 9, who were like the 9 climate activists nine men who were climate activists in Nigeria who fought Shell, like literally took Shell on their back and fought against the extraction of oil in that area that was essentially like ruining the Ogoni land. Like, it was ruining the water, it was ruining the land, it was affecting the health of the people, and a lot of them were fishermen. So like a lot of their livelihood is tied to the health of the river. And it was completely decimated by Shell. And they fought back, like they tried to take Shell to courts, and unfortunately were actually assassinated by the Nigerian government. And I think that like the Ogoni 9 were really sick. Like, I think at a time where like mainstream climate organizing or like mainstream climate conversations were around like deforestation and around like the ozone layer at that time, like to have a country and to have a people that have come back and they're like, it's actually companies, like oil companies that are ruining the planet, was like monumental for that time. And it still is, because we're still, 30 years on. It's only now in 2021 that Shell was, forced to pay back some of that money back to Nigeria and the Ogoni peoples. So that already shows you like how far, if at all, we've come from that moment. But not a lot of people speak about the women that like, in a lot of organizing stories, women are not the focus of who holds power, who's a leader, who does that work. And I think that like it's always an issue within organizing that we platform a person or a select number of people as like the face of a movement or the only people doing the work, when in reality, like organizing it takes so much work. Like, it takes a lot of like admin, it takes a lot of like rounding people up, it takes a lot of like care for like how are we actually making this as easy as possible to get people involved. And I think that that's what FOA did really, really well. Not only were they women that like were on the front lines fighting back with the men, but they inspire me because there was a moment in Nigeria where they mobilized 500,000 people to actually march to the government doors. And like they did that by like doing so many things. Like, they did loads of door knocking for women. They introduced different programs around like family planning, around like getting women different kinds of skills, whether it was like sewing or like some farming practices. So essentially they gave programs to the community to make it like to elevate people's lives and to make it worthwhile coming into the organizing movement. On the day of the march, they organized childcare. Like, they did so many things to make sure that, one, like, the barriers to entry were as low as possible. They were like, don't worry, we've got you. If you need childcare, we'll make sure that your children are looked after on the day. If you're scared, we'll talk you through what it means to march on the day. Like, they did everything they could. And also they like offered programs back to the community to make sure that, you know, these women were at a time, you know, in the 70s, it was not necessarily like valued for women to go to school. Or they may not have even been allowed to go to school, but like they made sure that women had some sort of trade to make sure that they could be financially independent. And it actually rocked my world. I can't lie. Like, they don't get a lot of shine, but like what they were able to do and what they have done for like climate movements everywhere, and particularly as like a Black climate organizer, like it blew my mind. And it just kind of showed me that like a lot of organizing is like it's all relational work. Like, yes, we are fighting for like a greater world and a changed world, but a lot of it is building these relationships and making it like almost near impossible for people to say no to joining the movement. So that was just really inspiring, because it's like to get 500,000 people to rock up on one day is like monumental. So definitely them. Like,
No, that sounds amazing. And something I really respect about you is your ability to do internationalist organizing. This idea of like very local organizing to then take it to like a global. You spoke a lot about Shell and also the climate, but something I want you to touch upon is like, what are these systems? When we talk about climate, when we talk about the destruction of our areas, like what are we fighting? And you spoke a lot about like this idea of like, we are fighting. And I want you to just touch on like, what are we fighting?
Absolutely, so many a system, but the like key systems that we're fighting against is, key systems I'd say is like colonialism and capitalism that work hand in hand. I think that like, particularly for climate change, shall I say, the colonial roots of climate change were kind of disregarded for a really long time. I would say that like Black and Indigenous and people of color across the globe have always made those like links really clear. I don't think you can have capitalism working in the way it does without colonialism, because somebody needed to be subjugated. Like essentially that means somebody needed to be made lesser than in order to be exploited and be made disposable and be extracted from, and their lands as well. So not just the people as in their bodies and themselves, but also the lands that they come from. Whereas, you know, in mainstream climate conversations, that wasn't really a spoken about thing until I would say the 2000s, even 2010s. And like capitalism as this economic and political system that, you know, extracts from the people and essentially like consolidates or holds wealth with a select number of wealthy people. Otherwise, we're capitalists. And it means that loads of people, i.e. us as wage workers and laborers, don't own the means of production. We don't own the labor that we're working on. And it means that we don't have a take or a share in the wealth that comes from it. Essentially, we're always being extracted from for these people that are at the top that can just have the wealth and consolidate it. And I think that like, why I talk about these two systems, or these two systems that are very much intertwined, is that like they churn out so much of what we see today. Much of the like injustice that we see today is linked to these two things that are quite historical, or like they're a couple of hundreds of years old in like human history. So things like, you know, chattel slavery, to the gentrification that we see now, to climate injustice, to, you know, like fashion injustice, to where we put our waste and where that waste ends up, to health injustices, to housing injustice, and essentially it always brings up this question of like, who gets to be there, who owns the land, who is disposable within this. And oftentimes it doesn't matter what is going on. And I also speak about genocide as well. So several genocides happening in like Palestine and Congo and Sudan, like it is always a case of like whose proximity to death is okay with everyone and whose isn't. And oftentimes you'll find that like it is always like people of color, working class people across the globe, like always. So that is like why I always speak about these systems. And even like sometimes people, for example, are like, I don't know how we can get from like chattel slavery to gentrification, because they feel like such disparaging things. know the absolute ills of slavery. And even then, we still don't know the ills because a lot of the worst things were destroyed.
Yep.
But like, to now compare that to a system or like to something where you're like, oh my God, there's a girls on the street. And that is really annoying. I don't want the girls on my street, but like,
No one wants.
where's the correlation between that and this? But actually it's like following the same patterns of like dispossession of like, whose land is it? Who is allowed to live here? And what happens if they're not allowed to live there? How are they gotten rid of?
Yeah.
Why are they being gotten rid of? And oftentimes, again, it's these people, working class people, people of color, that are like seen as like, these people don't matter, so get rid of them. And that's like wild. So it's like when you start seeing it in that way, it's like, oh, actually these systems or like these instances are two forms of legacy under the same.
Yeah. But I want us to go back just a little bit. You spoke a lot about gentrification, but I specifically want to talk about gentrification within Brixton. Especially, we've seen over the last couple of years, Brixton really change and shift. And the history, the radical Black history of like Black organisers, community centres, youth centres being erased from the wider conversation, and not just erased, but erased from history. So when you think about Brixton in 3 words, it could be experience, something that you would want to share about what Brixton is to you.
Anything and everything can happen in Brixton.
Yep.
Like, whatever you wouldn't expect is gonna happen here. From like people shouting in McDonald's to people preaching on the street to DJ AG outside of Brixton Library. I love DJ AG, so this is great. But it's just to say that like anything and everything happens here. And I think that you can meet any or every person in Brixton. And I think that that's what adds to the beauty of growing up and living somewhere like here.
I wanted to ask you, when did you first experience gentrification? When was the first time you heard about gentrification? And for people who's hearing this word for the first time, what is gentrification?
Do you know what? I can start with what gentrification is. So it is actually a term coined by Ruth Glass, who was, I believe, an urban geographer and a sociologist. And basically she coined it in the 1960s, and she was trying to capture this like phenomenon or like this movement of people that working class people being pushed out of areas that actually like you wouldn't even fathom had like really big working class communities, i.e. like Paddington, King's Cross, Euston, which I know did have like very big like Irish, Jewish immigrant populations before, and how they were essentially being pushed out for wealthier / middle class people moving into those areas and essentially like buying out these people, and from there introducing more capital, i.e. like investment, developers who would then build on this land and forever price out the original inhabitants. So that's like the term. It's essentially like people being displaced, working class people often being displaced for people who can afford to buy up in your area. And the first time I heard of it was actually like it was at GCSE time. So that would have been like 2011, 2012. My GCSE geography teacher, this was in geography. Guys, geography is such an important subject. I wish more people took it. But he was such a huge geography nerd. And like, the reason why the term was brought up was actually because of the 2012 Olympics in Newham. And like, basically that was the case study that we had to use for the actual GCSE exam. And it basically spoke about, it was under the like, in geography, there's a thing called urban renewal. That's like a subject that you have to learn within the topic or the subject, shall I say. And it essentially talks about like things like regeneration and gentrification. So there's always been this conversation of like, oh, we're making the area better. There's more amenities, like there's more cafes and there's this new jogging spot and there's this new pet spot to take your dog to watch cinema. And don't get me wrong.
A yoga spot. We can't forget the yoga
exactly
spot.
Yoga, Pilates, and guys, don't get me wrong, I'm a Pilates girl, and I have 2 cats, so I love the pet spots, but it's like actually like, why is it now that why weren't these things good enough for the people that have lived there for decades? Why is it now that there's investment from people that are wealthier? Are you like, we want to switch up this area completely? And so like the case study of Newham was basically to talk about different estates. So like Carpenter's estate in Newham was actually knocked down, and it was like large estate with like loads of people that lived in it, often like families, working class families, single parents with their children, like so many people. And it was essentially knocked down to build part of the Olympic Village, which now, and at the time, they actually told the old tenants that like they would be able to live in the Olympic Village. Come to find out at the end of it, it was such a hard scheme to get onto, and only like a very, very small percentage of people actually got to live in the Olympic Village after. And essentially, it was like all of this real estate that was bought by international developers to make money off of that prime land, instead of housing these people that had lived there for ages. So it was essentially, that was what gentrification was in action, was like these people, this community of people that had lived here for a long time, a lot of them were like small business owners. They had been very entrenched in the community they'd lived in for decades or generations, being essentially priced out of their area in order to make way for all of these like developers, both, you know, locally and internationally, to make big bank off of land. And that is why I always come back to the fact that gentrification, whilst on the surface level, is about, you know, these Costas and pet shops and Pilates coming. But actually, it's land justice. It's like about who owns the land and what they get to do with it. And oftentimes, it is landlords and developers who own that land. It's planned for. Like, somebody's authorizing all of these shops coming in. Somebody's authorizing these estate agents coming in. It is one, like the government, your local council, and private business developers and private landlords that are coming in and ruining your areas. Landlordism, it took its step up after Thatcher was like, we're going to open the market out. It means that people are no longer able to get social housing in the way that they did. And many people became landlords because it became profitable. There wasn't really, we had rent caps, and then Thatcher actually got rid of them to open up the market. And it's like, what does that mean for people who are now entering this market and are like, I can exploit everybody and everything and make loads of money.
Our communities have been underfunded, undersupported, over-criminalized. And this idea of like these areas for so long has been underfunded. And then the flip side is our areas are now being funded, but not for the working class communities, not for racialized communities, but actually for middle class people who enjoy the image of our areas without the actual people.
Yeah. And like exactly that. Like, and that is what makes me so devastated about gentrification and, you know, quote unquote regeneration. I don't believe in that unless it's shaped by communities, which it very rarely is. But yeah, what it means is that, again, it comes to this conversation of who's deserving of those things. Because like the people who have lived in that area for generations are the ones that are the most deserving of like a community pool and friggin', I don't know, really nice coffee and a great restaurant. Like, these are the people that are deserving because they've lived here all their lives. Why wouldn't they get to enjoy the fruits of what is to offer? And it's like the minute these people are pushed out is when suddenly everybody gets to have yoga and meditation centers and like, you know, aspects to like healing and well-being and good food and, you know, a local bookshop and library. Like, that's not good at all. Like, it's actually horrible. And it's just like, now, even with these things in the area, these same people that have been there for ages but are now still just remaining, can't even necessarily access these things either. Like, they have gone to some of these yoga studios and they've been looked at funny. And it's like, you lot shouldn't even be here. This is my end.
I grew up here.
Like, you came here 2 weeks ago. I have been here all my life. So it's like, even with that, you can see that there's still like, the problem with gentrification as well is that like, it kind of stratifies areas. Like people, you can talk to somebody who has recently moved to an area and they do not integrate in the local spaces that you go to. They live a completely different life. And that is the problem with like what gentrification does. It actually doesn't improve or add to community cohesiveness. What it does is it just atomizes us even further. Like people are living, I'm telling you, like if I speak to somebody who I know has moved to Brixton in the last 5 years, where they go and where I go are very different. They will not see half of the things that I see. And likewise for me and them.
Brixton is the hub of so much uprisings and resistance and community organising. What community organising has happened in Brixton? Like, what is the history of Brixton and the organising that has occurred over the years, and also in the 80s or the 90s or the early 2000s? I
say that Brixton has always like been a very like spirited or activist central kind of place. Like from, you know, the 70s and 80s, there were, you know, a lot of anti-AIDS, I said anti-AIDS, sorry. A lot of HIV campaigns were born out of here. A lot of queer liberation campaigns were born out of here. Anti-racist movements, feminist movements, squatters movements. So a lot of housing justice and a lot of squatters' rights things came out of this area. Like people were actively squatting in Brixton. People were actively fighting against landlords. People were actively trying to change housing law and housing policy. And that has always been like long-standing. Like there have been quite a lot of rogue landlords in Brixton at the time. A lot of people had arrived from SS Windrush in the 60s. They actually docked in Clapham, but a lot of them ended up living in Brixton. And the landlords were awful. Like a lot of people couldn't rent. So like people were pooling together in all sorts of ways in order to live in homes and be able to afford rent and be able to afford housing. And a lot of landlords were really rogue. So even from then, we see like the violence of like landlordism and tenants. Brixton has always been a place that has been like sparing against injustice, sparing against the police, sparing against the state and the many violences that come from the state, whether it's like, you know, the Home Office and like migration issues to, you know, the police and the violence of like raiding and kicking down people's doors and shutting down movements, to landlords and how they like ruin the lives of others and like increase rents and just kick people out and don't care where people stay. All of those things have like kind of spawned from Brixton soil. And where we are right now, Railton Road is like a spawn for a lot of this, like from, you know, Darkest Howe and like the Black British press, like he was churning out those articles doing political education for the people.
We spoke about the violence of gentrification. Let's talk about who's complicit. Let's talk about who's the perpetrators.
I would like to start with like the 1980s housing law that Margaret Thatcher introduced, the right to buy. And from then, that is kind of where we trace a lot of what we see as like the gentrification that comes in and why our rents are so high. So essentially that right to buy, which is kind of, it is painted as like a really great thing. It was essentially where like you could buy your council home. Which, you know, put a lot of first-time buyers onto the housing property list. It meant that a lot of people that essentially were kind of locked out of buying housing or entering the housing ladder were now in a space to like be able to do that. And it's like, I know quite a few people that have benefited from that. They now own their council home from which they still live in. So it's actually amazing for them. But what it did set out was it actually opened up the housing market for people to be able to buy council homes and other homes and be able to make profit. So it meant that like people were essentially at the time able to buy like a couple of council places at a time and be able to rent them out. So it's like they buy their own and then they are able to buy others and rent. It also meant that like it allowed private landlords to be able to buy property and rent it out. And essentially like that was the start of like rent caps essentially being abolished. So before that, so prior to the 1980s, we actually did have rent caps. So it's not necessarily, when we're calling for rent caps now, it's actually not a new or radical thing in the UK specifically. It's something we've actually had for a long time. But with this introduction of the right to buy and essentially opening up the market to landlords, we got rid of that. And essentially that has gone hand in hand with rents being able to be risen like no tomorrow. Some people's rents can go up by like 20%, 30%, 13%. And they're like, if you can't afford it, you can go. Along with the right to buy, there was also like an introduction of Section 21, which essentially is called a no-fault eviction. And that is where landlords can evict you for no reason. They don't actually need a reason to evict you. And that has caused a lot of disarray for tenants across London, across the UK, across Brixton, where it could be as simple as they want to raise the rent. They have seen that like and that's an issue of gentrification, is that like it kind of rises the value of an area, and then like landlords who are prospective profit makers in this system can be like, oh, somebody down the road, a landlord I know down the road is charging 2,000 a month for rent and I'm only charging 1,500. Why don't I raise it to 2,000? And what does that mean? You've already priced out your current tenants and you're probably pricing out a lot of other people that should have been able to live in your flat. I think what is interesting in Brixton is that like we do have one kind of large reigning landlord who has always tried to consistently change the landscape of Brixton for his own personal profit. And whilst I guess in some ways it makes it somewhat easier that we have one target, he owns a lot of land in Brixton and he has a lot of capital as a result of all of this ownership of land. So like, it is quite scary to think about like the power and the capital that he has, and that like maybe at the flick of a button, if if he wants to, he can completely change. At the moment in the UK, there's 700,000 homes unoccupied, which, like, even saying out loud feels like absolutely unfathomable. But it's like when you think about even in Lambeth alone, let alone other boroughs, like the waiting list for social housing is 10 years. And that was like 5 years ago when I checked. It probably is much longer now. And like, it makes me really sad that, like, you know, the government has like actively squashed movements like squatting with like anti-squatting laws, because it's like, actually, like, what are we doing with all of these empty homes? And it's like, can you imagine what our futures and our communities would look like if people could live in these empty homes? Like, what would the housing crisis look like? What would our housing system look like? What would our city look like if people were just given these homes? If homes were, you know, a sense of necessity rather than a commodity, like, what would our lives and our communities look like?
When you speak about gentrification and you connect it to an internationalist approach, an internationalist lens, what other struggles do you connect it with?
Whilst we feel really disconnected as like people without capital, the people with capital are very connected. Like, they are international with their business, they're international with their solidarity, for better or for worse. And
there are weapons and tactics.
Everything. Like, even when we think about like Arconic, which, you know, you named, was the company that put the flammable cladding on Grenfell, actually also produces arms for Israel, for, you know, genocide, enacting genocide. So that is to say that, like, that is one element of that, like, the kind of housing violence that we, and the company that we associate with such a tragedy with housing, and the kind of like dispossession of people in like a singular area, have like such internationalist arms of violence elsewhere to the point of like genocide. And like, I also want to name like that there are other real estate companies in the UK that also have set up real estate in Israel. So like, we have Savills, which is one of the which is one of the largest real estate companies in the UK. They kind of are in the business of like luxury flats, but they do own a lot of land, like real estate. And they actually do a lot of real estate in Israel. So again, you're kind of seeing that, like, even with the mass destruction of like Palestinian people and their land, they're more up and ready and willing to just set up a new town in these areas that have been decimated. It pains me to say that, like, a lot of the violence that we even see in the UK, as violent as it is usually the blunter end of what that violence could be. Oftentimes, countries in the global south, whether it's Palestine, whether it's Congo, whether it's Sudan, whether it's anywhere, are facing some of the sharpest and most immediate consequences of what these companies and individuals have to offer. And it's devastating.
Thank you so much for speaking about the power of community. And there's a quote that I always live by: we're not outnumbered, we're just out-organized, by Kwame Ture. This series is called Knowledge Chronicles. Knowledge is also theory and practice. So where do you get your knowledge from? Where's the best places to find it?
Can I say 2 things? Maybe even 3. First one, stay curious. I think that, like, we lose our sense of like childlike curiosity and wonder. And like, we're always like, why are these things happening? How did we get here? Remain curious. The answers are in the curiosities that you follow and find. Leading off from that, I would say that, like, curiosity is something that we should individually pursue, but also collective pursuit of curiosity is one of the most beautiful things. And I have been sharpened and shaped by being in organizing and campaigns movements more than any book ever. And I love books, but I would say off the back of that, like, try your hardest to like kind of Google a kind of movement that you're passionate about, whether it's housing, food justice, air pollution, and see what's in your local area and join an organizing or campaigns group. Organizing is often framed as something where you have to have this substantial amount of knowledge before you enter the movement. No, I would say you get sharpened within the movement more harshly than you would have ever known. Harshly in a good way. Like, it's a beautiful thing to be sharpened by others that care about you. So I'd say join a movement. The last thing I would say is get outside, like, party. I think that, like, people look down on partying as like a thing to do. It's a really political thing to do. And I think that, like, whatever, and I say partying, but basically what I want to say is that live your life to the fullest, whatever that means to you, because I think being able to enjoy your life in whatever way that looks like to you makes you realize that you're fighting for the beauty of what life is, and that actually, like, when you're organising, which is it's quite hard and emotional work, you realise that actually on the flip side of that, that is what you're fighting for. You're fighting for the times that you feel liberated, the times that you feel free within the club or in the garden. And you're like, actually, this is how I want myself and everyone else to feel all the time. And we have to fight for the life-affirming structures that enable that. So I would say, get outside, party, do something, live your life. Ultimately, I think everyone is a mosaic of everybody they've ever known and ever loved. So like, these ideas aren't necessarily new. They're always things that we come into contact with. But I also think that there is a case of like sitting with yourself and like building your own sense of like knowledge and like discernment and integrity around some of the principles that you come into contact with. So yeah, everywhere, the world.
I love that because it's so true. Knowledge is rooted in a journey. It's a constant. We're all educators, we're all teachers, we're all students. First and foremost, we're a student of life and people and community. So thank you so much.